I really don't want to cover the pretext of his story, because it is super heartbreaking. However, it is seen as crucial to what happened 8 years later, so I have to. In 2010, a little girl, just 2-year-old, stole the hearts of everybody across Britain, and even the world. At 1 year old, Sophie Atay was diagnosed with neuroblastoma. Stage 4 neuroblastoma. That's a very rare, very aggressive form of cancer. It's that rare that only 100 people are affected by neuroblastoma every year in the UK. At 18-month-old, Sophie was undergoing chemotherapy. Now obviously this is massively energy draining, and after all of this, Sophie only had a 40% chance of survival. However, Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York offered some treatment that Sophie could have, and this would up her chance of survival from 40% to 70%. And obviously there isn't a parent in the world that wouldn't instantly be on a plane to New York. But there was a major issue that was stopping Sophie's parents from doing that. And that was that this treatment would cost £500,000. £500,000. They didn't have even a fraction of that. So the only thing they could do was start a fundraising campaign. This campaign was pushed really hard and really tirelessly by Sophie's mom. And it weren't long before the media caught on and everybody in the country had heard of Sophie. Needless to say, they did get the £500,000. In fact, they surpassed that quite a lot. They doubled it. They had £1 million. The story got that big that even Simon Cowell donated £100,000. However, it was too little too late, and heartbreakingly, Sophie was too unwell to make the trip to New York. After a year-long battle, for most of her life, Sophie had been fighting this battle, and she died in her home in March 2010. Now, I've got a 1-year-old daughter, and that really does hurt to say. It hurts physically to look at the pictures of Sophie and imagine the pain that her parents must have been going through. But it is important that we cover that, because this story is about Sophie's mum and dad and what happened in the years after. Before we get into the story, let me introduce myself. I'm Harley. This is All I'm Saying Is. Here we tell true crime stories, and we also tell other stories every now and again, but not so much recently. Now, while you're watching this video, I do want you to share it. I do want you to put your opinions and your perspective down in the comments. But if you're doing either of them, please do be sensitive about what you say. This is a true crime. It involves real people, and they have got families that are also real people. So please just be a bit sensitive as you do so. Before we delve into the case, I'm sure many of you are wondering what happened to the £1 million. It is a fair question to ask, and I have got the answer. When it was deemed that Sophie was too unwell to fly to New York, that £1 million was donated to Two Simple Trust, which is a charity, and the money was put to help children battling cancer. So that's a decent legacy to leave. But after Sophie's death, her mom pledged that she would continue to help and continue to fight for Sophie's legacy. And she'd do that by fighting for more research into neuroblastoma in the UK. And like I've just said, she also agreed that by doing that, if they could achieve that, then Sophie wouldn't have died in vain. In July 2010, Sophie's mom and other loved ones of Sophie took the campaign to Downing Street. They'd collected more than 5,000 signatures calling for more research in neuroblastoma in Britain. So who was Sophie's parents? Sophie's dad was Atakan Atay. He was a Turkish-born businessman, and he had a few business interests, one being an hotel and another one being a convenience store across the road from where they lived. He'd also had other business interests, but I think at the time they were the only two that he had. Like I said, he had more, and we discussed them a little bit more later on. People said he was generous, he was kind, he was loyal, and he was funny. Sophie's mom was Helena Karine Atay, but she did quite often go by Karine, so during this story I'm going to call her Helena, but some people, some witnesses, might call her Karine. It's the same person. She was born in Hexham, Northumberland, England, but she was raised in Washington, which is in Sunderland, in England. That's right, not Washington DC, Washington in the UK. She'd previously been a medical secretary, but at some point she became a housewife. I don't really like that name, housewife, but that's what we reported, so that's how I'm saying it. Helena and Atakan had met at some point during the millennium, around about that time or just before. Helena was on holiday in Turkey. Their whirlwind holiday romance quickly turned into a marriage. It was apparently not long before they got married, and Helena did stay over in Turkey for a while, but after a certain period, they came back to the UK. In July 2010, 4 months after Sophie had died, chroniclelive.co.uk, which is a journalism website, named Helena the Mother of the Year. It was the result of the competition, which I think there were 130 moms nominated, and she'd been nominated by her sister. So this is where we start to get a bit deeper, because it's become clear reading all these different articles and all these judge statements and witness statements that Helena had always liked to drink, even before 2010. And again, that's no sense of judgment. We all like I don't personally drink that much, but it is a common thing, especially in this country. But after Sophie died, Helena's drinking got worse. And again, that is no sense of judgment. I can't imagine the amount of pain that she's in. And everybody deals with that in a different way. But obviously losing a child must put ridiculous amounts of strain on a relationship, even the strongest relationships. And we can only hope that during them hard times that you lean on each other and make each other stronger and help each other through it. But it does seem very much that Helena didn't do that. She leaned on alcohol more than she did Atakan. Now, obviously, I weren't there. I don't know how much that started, or when it started, or how much you were drinking. But that's certainly how every single thing you read about this is portrayed, that she was drinking a lot. But then I did read other sources that she was only drinking at night time, so it is quite hard to get the fix, and it is an important part of the story. Either which way, we portrayed that Atakan is in this position, that he's also grieving, he's got business interests to look after, they've got 2 kids that they both need to look after, and he's trying to support Helena, and obviously she's grieving really bad. And if anything, she seems to have gone in a bit of a self-destruct mode. As I said, I can't be certain to exactly how much she was drinking or how often, but it were causing a bit of trouble. She'd been caught drink driving, and she'd also been arrested and cautioned in 2016 when she bit the doorman of a nightclub. And sometime after her daughter's death, she'd been diagnosed with pathological bereavement disorder. That's also known as complicated grief, and I'd never heard of either of them things before, but the name is in the title, and it is getting more research and more recognised as a disorder. But it basically means that grief, that agonising physical pain grief, doesn't leave you. You don't adjust to it, and it just stays constant for years. In September 2015, Helena had threatened to buy a security guard at RVI, which is a specialist hospital, and she'd been took to this hospital because she'd took an overdose. In July 2016, it was reported that she was intoxicated and threatening to jump off a bridge. In 2010 and 2016, she was involved in collisions whilst drink driving. Throughout the years, Helena had also received private treatment. I don't know if this was for her depression or it was for her alcoholism, but certainly at times it had been for her alcoholism. And all sources suggest, especially the judge suggests, that it were Atakan that had paid for it. However, there were no end in sight. Helena was growing more distant and she was still drinking a lot. And obviously that's not making home life for Atakan or the children very nice. Then on the 18th of October 2018, things took a final turn for the worst. As with everything in this story, there is so many different versions. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at Helena's initial response when the police arrived and while the incident were happening. And then we're going to look at the information that goes against her, we'll look at the court stuff, and then we'll finish on what the judges said. Just bear with me, it should all make sense towards the end. So on Thursday the 18th of October 2018, the children were upstairs in bed. At 20 to 9 at night, Helena went across to the shop and selected a bottle of wine. Helena drank 3/4 of this bottle. Now, I'm not sure if she'd had any more to drink before that, but 3/4 of a bottle of wine isn't that much for somebody that's supposed to be an alcoholic. And I'm not saying that in a competitive way, oh, is that all you can drink? But usually when you hear of alcoholics, they drink all day, slowly and constantly. And if she's only had 3/4 of a bottle of wine, it doesn't seem that much. Between 9:24 at night and 10:49, she was upstairs in a bedroom sending Facebook messages. But at 10:59 she got out of bed with a £10 note stuffed in a bra. Her intention was to go to the shop and get more wine. But only 5 minutes after she sent that final message, Atakan phoned 999. He'd been stabbed multiple times. The first wound was to his shoulder blade. The second and most fatal was to his chest, and it punctured his heart. The stab wound was just above a tattoo on his chest that read, "Sophie, my endless love," which was obviously a tattoo tribute to Sophie. The knife used was 12 centimetres long, and it said that the knife went all the way in. There was then another attempt to stab him in the lower back, but this didn't stab him, it just damaged his clothes. Atakan phoned 999, but when the operator asked which service he required, he could only utter the words, "999 please." His wounds were that bad he could no longer talk, leaving Atakan rendered unable to speak, on the floor, dying. In all, the call lasted 17 minutes, and just after 20 seconds of the call being on, you could hear Helena talking in the background. During the call, she can heard me saying quite a few things, and here's some of them.
"You're lying. I would never do that to you, Atakan. I would never hurt you. I hurt you in the side, at the side just on your nipple. Atakan, get up. I would never hurt you. Stay with me, stay with me. Sophie, Sophie, there's Sophie there. Come on, Atakan. I'm really sorry. I love you so much. Atakan, please, please. Atakan, we're gonna get you an ambulance. I'm really sorry. Atakan, I love you so much."
He does go on, she sobs while shouting, "Please, please, please, God please," and then shouts to the operator to tell him that he's gone grey. But I didn't want to include everything she said. I don't think I could find everything she said, but I didn't even want to include as much as I could, because after a bit it got a bit distressing, and especially with that slightly robotic voice I use, I didn't want to cause anyone any distress. But you get the picture of what was happening. At first she's saying he's overreacting, Atakan, get up, and then she starts panicking and she gets a bit scared and she starts saying sorry and declaring her love for him. And obviously she mentions Sophie. Now at first I didn't quite understand why she'd do that. I thought, well, that's quite a horrible thing to do. But then as I read on and as I looked at it more, it said that were an attempt to like boost his adrenaline. It was trying to keep him conscious. And I suppose it still doesn't feel very nice to me. It still feels a bit, that's not good. But it does demonstrate how desperate Helena was to keep him alive. Helena was guided through chest compressions by the phone operator, but in court it was said that she didn't carry out effective CPR. When paramedics turned up, Atakan was laid on the living room floor, but there was no sign of life. And subsequently, Atakan was pronounced dead at 11:30 at night, just half an hour before midnight. Meanwhile, the police have arrived, and here is the body cam footage from when they arrived.
Anything said at all, or?
Not to me, but to be honest, we're not even married.
Oh, right, okay.
At the minute.
But when you said that they were shouting downstairs, what have you heard?
About his nephew and stuff.
Right, so you haven't actually heard anyone downstairs?
Well, I don't think so, from what I can think.
Right, okay.
I'm thinking about what he was having an argument about his brother, but his brother lives in Ukraine, and he was talking about, he offered that he wanted him to loan money, and he didn't want to loan it, but that's got nothing to do with here.
Right, okay.
But you have got enemies.
What do you mean by that?
Just not enemies, and they wouldn't do that. Just
okay.
for, I don't know, business people.
Are we talking, because obviously he's in a serious condition now, so we need to know like all the information we can.
Yeah.
When you're saying enemies, is that criminal stuff he's in?
Not at all. He's not like that.
Right. So what do you mean by enemies then?
They're just business partners that have gone.
So there's been fallouts over business.
Yeah, that's it.
What does he do like?
He's got a fly sleeve across the road, and I guess.
Oh, is that his? Is it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Is he okay? Please.
Because of the circumstances, okay, this officer is now going to arrest you on suspicion of murder.
Oh, really? Is that fair?
So if you're arrested for murder, please.
Right, incredible. That's it.
Should be nice to be you.
Sorry?
It should be nice to be you. You've got no problems.
Everyone sort of problems to varying degrees.
Not like this. So, an argument that got out of control.
That what happened?
I'm not going to tell you. I'm not a killer, that's it. And I've got to live with that now.
Now, the first thing that struck me is how calm Helena seems. She doesn't seem to be in any distress, and it's only half an hour after this has happened. And one of the first things she says is, "We're not even married at the minute," which is a super strange thing to say, especially as one of the first things you say. And that statement's ignored quite a lot by the press. And at the time, it's reported that they hadn't been wearing the rings, and they were considering getting a divorce, but they were still very much married. She then goes on to say that Atakan had been arguing on the phone about his nephew. She then randomly spurts out that Atakan's got enemies. And then when the officer starts to ask more questions about that, she kind of fobs it off, realising that she's going down a dark route. But then the officer does confirm, "Do you mean he's got criminal enemies?" And she's like, "Oh no, not that. They're just like business enemies." I don't think she ever said, "I didn't do it," but she definitely didn't own up. And she was trying her best to deflect attention away from herself. However, after this, down at the police station and in court, things changed completely. Helena was now telling the police a story of domestic abuse, claiming that Atakan was coercive and controlling. Now, this small detail is hard to understand because different sources claim different things. As you've just heard on the police interview, she makes out that she was upstairs and Atakan was downstairs arguing on the phone. But then some sources say that she said Atakan were in bed, she'd stayed up drinking, watching TV and whatnot else. So I don't quite understand which bit's true there, but obviously we've heard from her what she said. Either which way, she intended to go and get more wine. And as she came downstairs, Atakan followed her. He was angry and he tried to grab her as she walked. He kicked her in the leg and in the arm, and this hurt her arm, and it also caused her to fall down the stairs. She got up and went to the door, but the key had been hidden. She couldn't find the key. At this point, Helena's telling him to let go, and she was terrified, and she thought that he was really going to hurt her. And she claims that he's done that in the past when he strangled her. It went from arguing to pushing and shoving. She told him she was going to climb out the window, and the next thing she knows, they're both grappling in the living room. Helena says she can't recall stabbing him. She also goes on to say she can't even recall holding the knife or seeing the knife, let alone using it, but then she says, well, I must have. The next thing she can remember is being above him, but to the side. She was looking at his face, and he was pulling some funny faces, and I think this is where she thought he was overreacting a bit. And as she stood looking at him, she sees a small spot of blood, and that's when these funny faces start to make sense, and she phoned 999. Which is contradictory, because we've just heard that it was Atakan that phoned 999. So Helena's version of events are that she had been abused, and that night Atakan would not let her leave the house. She was scared, and the stabbing was in defence. And this version of events did continue. It remained all the way through the court case. And she had witnesses to back this up. In court, Lindsay, who had been a lifelong friend of Helena's, said that she'd also witnessed Atakan's abuse. She told the court of a time in 2013 when Helena had left home and went to her house. And I just want to interject here that weren't rare, apparently. She had left the house quite a few times, and most of them times it was about how much she'd been drinking. Apparently, that's what I've read. Either which way, this particular time, Helena wanted to go back to the house to check on her son. So Lindsay says, yeah, fine, I'll come with you. And when they got to the house, she stepped in. And this is what she said after.
Atakan had a face of thunder and started calling her in Turkish. I said I would take her to mine to let everyone calm down, and he said I don't know Karine and what she has turned into. He came after Karine and me, and Karine said she would stay. I told her not to and that the children could come and stay. Atakan started shouting, saying, "Are you trying to wind me up?"
Text messages was also discussed. One was from Helena's sister to Lindsay, and that said,
Karine has told me today Atakan has been physical towards her, but then also defended him by saying she's just as bad towards him. I told her she needs to leave him and contact the police, but I don't know if she will. It seems he has some kind of hold over her. I despise him. I've never trusted him from day one. He has stripped Karine of all confidence and made her feel so worthless. I would not put it past Atakan to take away to Turkey, and this is what worries me.
And these witnesses keep coming. Helena's younger sister said that she'd been on holiday in Turkey with them, and some men joined him on the dance floor. She said Atakan had become aggressive, and back at her apartment they were arguing, and he punched Helena in the face. She'd been asked in court if she'd ever seen any marks on Helena during her and Atakan's relationship, and she replied, all the time. She had them very, very regular. She always had marks up and down her arms. I seen a mark on her jaw. I seen her with black eyes. One time I saw bruises around her neck. She also said black eyes were from hay fever, from rubbing her eyes. She said she bruised easily. She also said she had walked into cupboard doors and had a broken finger, and said she jammed it in the door. Helena said the only reason that she stayed with Atakan was because she feared if it broke up, he'd have took the children to Turkey. But according to Atakan's friends, that feeling was mutual. Neither of them wanted to be together. Neither of them were wearing the wedding rings. And Atakan wanted to leave, but he didn't because he didn't want to leave the kids. Now, I hope at this point you can feel how hard this already is. Not only for me to write, but for the court case. It is just one massive confusion. He said, she said, but obviously Atakan's not alive to say. He's not alive to defend himself and call witnesses. And it's particularly hard for me because what I don't want to do is kind of fob her off and say, no, you weren't abused, because we don't want to create a situation in which people that are being abused feel that they won't be believed if they come forward. But that being said, we also don't want to just believe every single person that says they've been abused. We have to look at the evidence. We have to look at what's been said. And there's never been any report of domestic abuse to the police, although on many occasions the police had been round the house for disturbances. And in the scheme of people lying about domestic abuse, if there was ever a motive to lie about it, this is it right here. So that being said, let's get to the part where this case gets even harder. Vicky used to work in Atakan's bar in Berkeley, and she also worked in their shop. She told the court that Helena were quite often drunk, or at least when she came into the bar she was already been drinking. She said, I don't think I ever saw her come in sober. And then she added, sober, Karine was a very intelligent, very switched on, focused. She would jog and hold a conversation. Drunk, completely different person altogether. Then the jury heard from Heather, who lived 2 doors down from the Atays. She described an incident that took place in the middle of the night. She heard Helena shouting outside, and she went to have a look what was happening and saw Helena arguing with a neighbour. And this neighbour is at an house where this party's going on. She said, I went to the front door. Karine was standing outside my gate. She'd had a drink in her hand. She was talking to a neighbour. Karine was a little angry at something that had happened at the house. She was aggressive and obviously had a drink. Atakan arrived and calmed the situation. She told the court that she was aware that the police had been around to the house on a number of occasions over the years. So okay, that's not a damning statement. Everybody's had a drunken argument at some point in their life. But the prosecution then brought forward Mr. Olmes. He'd been Atakan's friend for a long time, and they'd also been business partners at one point. They had a leather shop and a menswear business. He said when Helena was drunk, she could get aggressive, and she could start a fight. He said one day, out of the blue, Atakan had informed him that they should go their separate ways in regards to their business ventures. He said he was absolutely gobsmacked, but later on he found from Atakan that Helena was not happy with their partnership. So now we've got witnesses from both sides. Helena, along with some friends, are claiming that you were abusive. Then we have employees at Atakan's that are saying that she was quite often drunk and she could become quite aggressive. I'm sure by now we've all got opinions of what happened, and I really do want to hear them in the comments. But reality is, we weren't there, none of us. Neither was Helena's sister, or Atakan's witnesses, or anyone else. So we'll never really know what happened behind closed doors. So before I tell you my take, let's listen to what the judge said. Unfortunately, I don't have the entire transcript of what was said in the court on this month-long trial. So we are missing a lot of evidence and a lot of speculation that was given in court. However, the judge does make remarks about some of the evidence that was said in court. And before we go to that, I just want to say the reason I've decided to put as much of the judge's sentencing statement in as I can, rather than just bits, is because I feel that if I just put bits in, it might be a bit misleading. So I figured if I put the entire thing in, you'll get a good perspective of what the judge said.
Atakan Atay, who undoubtedly loved you right to the end, did all he was capable of, constantly trying to stop you drinking, paying for you to receive private treatment, taking you to and from rehabilitation treatment programs, but you would not be helped. When in drink, or craving drink, you would metamorphose into a totally different person. You would become obstructive, abusive, argumentative, threatening, aggressive and violent. When in such a state you were a danger to yourself and others. It was inevitable because of your determination to continue drinking and Atakan's resolve to stop you, that the two of you clashed. When you were trying to leave the house to obtain yet another bottle of wine, he would physically try to prevent that happening. Occasionally that resulted in minor injuries to both sides. How unbearable life must have been for Atakan. It was a never-ending cycle and you persisted, well knowing how much damage your abuse of alcohol was causing within the household. It's clear that after that final message you made the decision to leave the house to obtain a second bottle of wine. Atakan, as he had done many times before, tried to stop you. I'm sure he didn't attack you as you have alleged. Your account is he stamped on the back of your calf, sending you flying down the stairs. If this had happened there would have been injuries to bony prominences, there were none. The whole situation would have been diffused if for once you had shown some resolve and not succumbed to your craving for alcohol. But you weren't prepared to let your husband stand between you and yet another drink. You resorted to violence, but this time, unlike other times, there was a knife readily at hand. Having armed yourself with that, knowing Atakan was unarmed, you repeatedly attacked your husband with the knife. The account you gave to the first paramedic was that he had tried to keep you in the house so you stabbed him. That, in a nutshell, is what truly happened. You weren't acting in defense of yourself when you stabbed Atakan Atay to death. While he may have been restraining you, he wasn't attacking you. He was simply an obstacle between you and another drink. After some more thinking time you came up with a concocted extensive account of control and coercive behavior by Atakan Atay over many years. Family members lent themselves to the fabricated account, one of your sisters claiming she saw you with injuries all the time. Yet the owner of a tanning shop you visited regularly never saw you with any injuries. You lied to psychologists and psychiatrists, leading defense experts to make an incorrect diagnosis of complex and chronic PTSD arising from Atakan's treatment of you. Psychological tests have confirmed you have exaggerated your symptoms. You sought to portray Atakan as a violent, controlling monster when he was no such thing.
Ultimately, the judge also agreed that there was no evidence of intent and it wasn't a premeditated murder. Helena Karine Atay was sentenced to 14 years in prison for manslaughter. Before we go to my thoughts, there is one more thing I want to do, and that is relay a quote from Helena. This quote was from some time before the stabbing, and it was when Helena's sister had confronted her about how much she was drinking, and this was a part of what she said in response. Until you have held your child and watched them take their last breath, and slept with their cold, lifeless body, and then bathed and clothed them in the morning, and then handed their bodies over to the undertakers, then please don't judge me. Now, the reason I wanted to end with that statement, with that quote, is because I think that's what summarises this entire case. I can't say Atakan wasn't abusive. I haven't seen any evidence that it wasn't. But from all the evidence I have seen, from all the statements I've read, as far as I'm aware, Atakan was trying his best to be loyal, faithful and helpful. And by no fault of her own, I said with caution, by no fault of her own, Helena just weren't coping and she was really struggling with the grief. And like the judge said, I think she was in that moment of, it was just that anger, that moment of anger that Atakan was stopping her from getting another drink. And the drink is all that made her feel okay, all that made her feel safe. So she were in that moment, and that's where all this came from. Just one silly, stupid moment that really weren't worth it. And I think the worst part of this is it's tarnished Sophie's legacy. Whenever you now type in Sophie Atay on any search, most of the search results come up are about this incident. And let's not forget there is 2 other children that now don't have a dad and their mom's in prison. I've tried my best to be unbiased in this, and that's why I've laid out the way I have. Because I didn't want to point the finger. I didn't want to say Atakan weren't abusive. I didn't want to make Helena look like the bad person. It's not unknown for people to portray their partners in a dark light. And if you look at everything that the witnesses have said about Atakan being abusive, it could be seen on the other side. Like, for example, when Lindsay went to see Helena's son with her, Atakan said, "You don't know what she's turned into," or something to that effect. And that there to me says, look, I might look abusive. And if you put that narrative in the mind of Lindsay that's been told is abusive, it's going to look abusive. But if then you put that around and look at it from a perspective of Atakan, he might not be being abusive. He might be just wanting his wife back. That she's fighting addiction by all intents. Either which way, it is a very, very tragic story. A very, very tragic case. And it is such a shame. On every level. As always, there will be links in the description for help. We're going to do alcoholism and drug addiction. We're also going to do a few links for domestic abuse. If you are a victim of domestic abuse, then please do head over to the Holy Corral video on my channel. At the end of that, there is a lot of information that could be helpful. I'll put that up here somewhere. Stay safe out there. It is a dark world. But don't forget to show the love and kindness, because that exists too. Next week, guys.